Hello and welcome to Parenting Stuff I Wish I Knew Sooner and Want You to Know Now. I'm your host, Erica Desper, founder of the Center for Confident Parenting and a mom who seems to learn everything I need to know the hard way. And today I'm joined by Maria Natapov, who is not only an experienced step parent herself, but a step parenting coach and blended family strategist through her business, Synergistic Stepparenting. Maria, welcome.
Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited for this conversation.
I am excited too. I was telling you before we hit record, I've been following you and looking for an opportunity to share you with my audience, and I felt like this was the perfect one. Some people listening know my journey, some do not. So my personal experience involves separation and divorce and remarriage and ongoing co-parenting on top of many other things. So I'm just super excited to chat with you today. We know this is very common in the modern family. So let's do this. Are you ready?
I am. I can't wait.
Awesome. First things first, tell us a bit about your family and how and why you came to offer support in this area.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll take it a little bit earlier on, but I'll try and keep it brief. So I am a child of divorce. Really, my parents kind of never had a good marriage as far back as I can remember. I kind of get the sense it was from before I was even born. And we also immigrated from Russia. So just a couple of things to highlight there. 180-degree difference in values, in how kids are treated. They're like very much possessions, which I know can still happen in families here, but that was like the prominent and really only way there. And of course, the language, right, and everything else was completely different as well. So it was quite a bit of an adjustment for me. And what I didn't realize then that I have since deduced is it was the perfect setup for me to end up in an unhealthy relationship. My first romantic relationship, it was both physically and emotionally abusive. And when I started to really understand my kind of almost addiction to chaos and recognizing some of these patterns as to how and why I got into this place, because I was somebody very interested in psychology and sociology and constantly like improving connection, because I saw all the dreamy, beautiful scenes on TV of like these connected moments and these ahas for parents and kids. And I was like, I want that. So I thought I was somebody who would recognize red flags. And lo and behold, I found myself being a victim and like really deep in it. So it took some hard work to understand, navigate, and heal through that. And I'm fortunate to be in a really wonderful relationship with my husband, who had healthy boundaries. Like it was all honestly very uncomfortable at first.
For real.
Yeah.
Coming from a trauma background and working through it now. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had this beautiful stepdaughter, and I tried my best to be like, you need a good role model for your stepdaughter. Like, I'm not it. Let's help you get somebody who is a better suited parent, kind of like co-parent, step parent, another adult in her life. And it was interesting. He helped me to understand by telling me, because you had those experiences, you didn't like, and you can understand what you didn't like about them and how they made you feel, that actually probably is going to set you up to be a much better parent than you realized. So that was a big aha early on. And then 5 years into my journey, my stepdaughter revealed to us she was being abused and neglected by her bio mom and stepdad. For the first of those 5 years, she was living with them during the week. She went to school there, and we only had her on the weekends. So every weekend and whenever we could around vacations, holidays. And so she came to live with us full time. And it's interesting how my own trauma stuff helped me to recognize intuitively what she was needing or may have been experiencing, the things that were really confusing, really difficult to name, really difficult to say out loud, and just extremely challenging and painful to navigate. So I am thankful for that. And at the same time, just thinking about how long it took somebody like me, who was extremely passionate about really unraveling and naming and understanding all of that, just how long it took for me to truly get it. Because I think I only completely understood all of the interconnectedness of it all, like maybe within the last year and a half. And that just blows my mind. So I think that's just to underscore how complicated these things are. And I'm so thankful, because it was, so when she came to live with us full time. I used to work in healthcare after the honeymoon period because her situation was pretty severe. And that just means for those who might not be familiar with that terminology, when somebody has extensive ongoing trauma, when they're removed from that situation, it first feels like a vacation and they're not completely processing. And throughout that time, they're also usually not processing because they're just extremely in survival mode.
Yeah.
And then they actually start to make sense of what their mind and body and spirit has been truly experiencing and starting that healing journey, which in the beginning usually looks pretty terrifying and horrendous, quite frankly. But the good news is acknowledging it, getting the support, dealing with it head on is extremely powerful and leads to the usually best outcomes. So it was at that point, my company had a turnover. They took 2 departments I was supporting in-house to the parent company and eliminated my job. And I found myself in this interesting place of dragging my feet doing another thing that was like marketing or sales or sort of removed. And then I stumbled on a parent coaching program. It was a trauma-informed parent coaching program with an organization that dealt a lot with foster children and foster to adoption situations. So actually their parent coaching program was to help with permanency for the families because that was something that was challenging. And it was phenomenal. Like it hit on all the things that I had experienced, all the things that were very much relevant to our current situation at that time. And it was, I think, really where it reinforced and allowed that my kind of true calling to blossom. And then I joined step parenting and blended family support groups and saw just how many people were suffering with all the challenges of those dynamics, because it was like they're bringing their own hurt and trauma, every single one, children and parents and adults, and also trying to make it work. And they have all of the best intentions and no tools or skills or resources to support them, and no safe place to turn to understand what is common and how to navigate those things, which strangely I realized through this very convoluted road in my own personal life, I had gained some really powerful skills and resources and tools. And that was really what brought me to wanting to help them navigate it, because, there was a successful way to do so. Sorry, that was more long-winded than I anticipated.
When I try to tell my story, it goes the same way. No, I didn't want to interrupt you, but gosh, there's so much I could go back and would want to dig into and pick apart there. Obviously, just I'm picturing you as, with a new partner and then have a kiddo thrown at you full time, and not just a typical situation, just like all the extra layers. I just want to honor how challenging that must have been. And you're trying to do you, but at the same time, you kind of have to do him and her. And, we don't, as moms, often get the time we need for ourselves to process or take care of ourselves. So that sounds like a lot. Obviously, it all worked out beautifully, and it brought you to your calling, which is, I think, how almost everyone I've had on so far came to it through their own personal experiences and seeing a need and just wanting to, support families there. So that's beautiful. And I'm glad she's in a much better situation now. So now that you are seeing other families in their own situations, what are the challenges that you are seeing that are unique to blended families?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think it's really common that in blended families, both the new partner and the children feel left out. So as soon as the parent is turning to the children, the new partner feels left out, because there's a whole dynamic, there's a whole history, a whole established rapport, world of stuff there. And conversely, when the parent turns to the new partner, the children feel left out, because it's like, oh, like this person's more important. Oh, and also you're forgetting mom or dad, right? Like you're ready to move on. And what can commonly come up too, as far as fears for children, in addition to maybe some of the more typical ones that we name, which is that kids often blame themselves in a situation of divorce and they think it's their fault. In addition, there's also this usually, I think, unspoken concept of, oh, well, you just traded mom in or dad in. Does that mean that you can just get rid of me too if I do something you don't like? And
Yeah.
it can feel really scary. And so, because for kids, we have to remember they're developmental in a very different place. They're much more fragile. They don't have all of the same abilities to understand complex
Right.
situations like we do. And yet they are very much experiencing all the same complex feelings. So they just need way more support and handholding to name it, process it, understand what their options are for dealing with it, and all of these different things. And so they just need a lot more reassurance, a lot more commitment and check-ins. And kids do a phenomenal job of putting on a brave face and saying, nope, I'm fine. Right. And we know very well that kids, tweens and teens in particular, we almost take it as a given that they're going to push us away. In fact, what's happening is they just are overwhelmed, and they also feel like, well, you're not going to get it. Right. Like, you're just going to give me a hard time when I don't do XYZ the way that you're expecting me to. And so that can create a rift when actually what they really need more than anything is the support of that parent to help them understand their experience, process their feelings, possibly even find external supports to support them further. So I think those are some of the common ones. Yeah. And then, of course, co-parenting challenges with not only between, not only between I think every parent and every one of us, right, has our own experiences and kind of values as far as what we think is the right thing to do for kids. And the intentions are always wonderful. I think the challenge is when there's misalignment or like not enough conversations happening between the partners around, to get on the same page, because kids very much do need and respond well to a united front. It helps give them security and clarity around what the expectations are. In addition, I think it's even more challenging because there's the co-parenting happening with the ex-partner, and there's a whole world of challenges there between not only the two partners that got divorced, but now with the new individuals in the mix, and like where they should and shouldn't, or notions of where.
And we always say, like, there's no manual for kids, there's no manual for parenting, but wow, there really, that I know of, is not a manual for that stuff. And that's where people's personalities and temperaments and histories, their baggage, can really, really show. And that's been as challenging for us as probably what started it all. So and this I didn't prep you for. I feel like loyalty issues, I'm sure a lot hinges on what ages the kids are, maybe when the separation and divorce happens, and then when the new step parent enters their life. My son was young enough, he doesn't really remember pre-step parent years. So I think that was a benefit. However, it was very hard for him having a 3-year-old brain. That like you have enough love for everybody, and just because you're having fun with stepdad doesn't mean anything bad about dad. And like there's not like there's just plenty to go around, and that was always really challenging. I'm sure that's not unique to us. Can you speak to that a little bit?
No, absolutely. Yes, that is a very, very common issue. And I think truthfully, it's common for all ages, no matter how old the child is, even in cases where there's adult children, because there's a tendency, right? I think it's a very human concept that we always think like, well, one person's responsible, right? Like one person's to blame. And what can happen, and this is why it's really useful to go very slow post-divorce in terms of recoupling, not only for yourself, but for your kids as well, is when it is pretty common, I would say, that rarely is it that two people are ready to get divorced for the same reasons to the same degree at the same time. Usually one is a little bit more ready and the other one is like coming along for the ride a little bit. And so in those situations, particularly if one parent is not okay and the other one is moving on and now dating, it can feel to that other parent that this person is abandoning them, almost like all of the life they've built up until that point doesn't matter, because they're so ready to jump ship and move on. And for the kids in particular, it can feel that way. And especially when they're seeing mom or dad not being okay when the other parent is moving on, that's when they can really, those loyalty binds kind of flare up even more.
And is that a version of them like wanting to protect that parent who was maybe left behind.
Yeah,
That makes
exactly.
sense.
Because they are half of each parent. That's also the same thing that flares up. Like if one parent is speaking badly of the other parent, it's the same thing. It's like, well, I'm half of that parent. And there's like an internal protective mechanism that comes up, including now that is actually creating a rift with the parent who's speaking badly a little bit. So to your point, that's very, very common. And that's exactly why talking about through all of this, to bring it to light, to give it space to be heard, to be seen, to be explored together, and to also have opportunities like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that this was so hard for you. I didn't realize it was feeling that way to you. Let me see what I can do on my end to be more compassionate, right? To support you more in this, to be more considerate of how these things might be making you feel. And so I'm always in favor of reminding parents, like, live your life, right? Don't put your dating life on hold. Don't do the whole sacrificial thing for your kids, because it's not useful, right? You're just setting yourself up to likely have resentment in the future. And it's not helping anything. However, don't throw your relationship in their face, especially when they're clearly letting you know they're not ready.
Yeah. And I feel like along with that loyalty and the desire to protect, there came a lot of defensiveness from my kiddo. Like, if he would interpret comments I made as like a criticism of his bio dad, right? And I was like, wait, whoa, what? No, I just like, I asked what you had for dinner last night. Like, I did not say like your father doesn't feed you, right? Like he just internalizes all of that and perceives it a certain way. And I mean, part of that is how his brain is wired, but it's just also delicate. And you're right. All that has to kind of come to the surface, and there needs to be a conversation surrounding that. I definitely do want to come back to what to do, what not to do. You just touched on that. But I'm wondering before we get to that. So I am also the child of divorce. So I have had a step parent myself and, lived it as a kid. And then also now, I'm living it as a parent. I've never had the experience though of being a step parent. So I'm wondering if like the feelings that people experience and the challenge, well, obviously the challenges have commonalities, but you know how they try to say there's like stages of grief, although I think that's been debunked. Are there like common things that people are feeling when they choose this or kind of get tossed into it?
Yeah, there are for sure. I think sometimes, well, first of all, it feels very lonely. It feels very isolating. It was so interesting to me that my experience, I grew up in America, fluent in English, like very much immersed in the culture. My husband is American. My stepdaughter's American. And it was shocking how many commonalities there were from like coming into America from Moscow, Russia, to stepping into a blended family situation as a step parent. There's just, in addition to like their own values and their own like, past experiences or traditions or what have you, there's just like rhythms, right? And there's little nuanced sayings and references, and like there's all of that internal life that is so unique, and
like you almost feel like a stranger in a strange land.
Exactly. It's truly a culture unto itself, and you're a fish out of water, and you're like, wait, what? And nobody's like, oh, well, here's like a book to read, or here's a dictionary. You just sort of have to do your best to figure it out and ask questions and pick up on the cues. And in addition, there's so many stakeholders. So in addition to like the immediate family, like the kids and the partner and then the ex, there's also grandparents and aunts and uncles and friends, long-term friends who are like family members. And then beyond that, like teachers and coaches. And there's this whole world of people, and they all care deeply about the children, and they all have different expectations. And they have strong expectations of you, and understanding who are they, what are their needs, and what are their expectations, and then trying to meet those expectations. It's a lot to take on.
Yeah. Wow. It really is. And at the same time, like I said, probably navigating a new-ish relationship yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And processing your own emotions, to your point, because it's upsetting. Sometimes it's hurtful. And, people aren't setting out to do so. And yet, and then especially like, so you take the stress of you're working so hard trying to understand all the things and meet the needs. And then you have your own emotions about how it's going and that stress. And then, this is on top of a life you're already leading with a job and other relationships and possibly other challenges. Like maybe there's
like
an
the plate
illness
is really, it's like one of those plates in the commercial where you pile all the food on it and it bends and breaks.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
And I'm only laughing because I've been there. It's not a funny situation. And it's just so important. So, all right. So we've kind of set the scene with like how you got here, why you offer this, how common it is, why it's needed. Let's dig into like some actionable things. So if a parent is considering separation or divorce in the midst of it, or maybe they're well into it and they're hearing this and like, maybe there were things I should have done, right? What I want to ask is what are some things that, whether you're the bio parent, the step parent, what are things we can do to best support our children? I want to add to that though ourselves. So I don't know if you want to divide that, however you want to divide and conquer that hefty question.
Yes. I think I'll focus on the children first, and then I will focus on ourselves if that's okay. So and I think starting with the divorcing parent or divorced parent is probably the best place because they have the direct link to the kids. So they, and usually, yes, the burden unfortunately does fall more on them than the new person because they have the established relationship and they're already a core support system for the child. Regardless of anything, that's always kind of how it's going to be. Even though if the kids are young enough, it is possible to develop a really great and close relationship with the step parent, almost like a parent, but it's always going to be the bio parent that, that is the crux of all of it. And so in order to support their kids best, as we said, lots of conversation, but also preparing children for what to expect. Right. So, for example, obviously, when divorcing, this is probably common knowledge at this point, but I'll mention it just in case it's not. Where possible, both of the spouses should tell the kids and they should already have hashed out exactly what they're going to say. One important piece also is not to overburden your children. Just share what needs to be said and answer questions as they arise and be truthful. But remember to maintain a boundary because kids are young and they cannot handle and should not be handling a lot of adult emotional things. Right. So like, say one partner cheated, there's no reason to talk about that. There's really no
matter how much you might want to tell somebody else, tell your girlfriend.
Yes, exactly. Right. Like go complain right to your whole support system, but do not share that with the children because it's not going to benefit your co-parenting relationship. It's not going to benefit them. It's actually going to just create a lot more havoc and heartache and unnecessary stress. And it's actually, even if for selfish reasons, it's going to come back around on you because when kids are stressed and they don't know how to process their emotions or deal with them in a productive manner, it comes out sideways, which is possibly disrespect, acting out, what have you. So for your own sanity, try to find it within you of how to make peace with the fact that this is not a blame game. Not to the children anyway. Again, there's other places you can go and vent and do all of that, but not when it comes to your kids. And it's also a way to really preserve their mental well-being and to safeguard it.
Yeah. And I assume you're also already setting the stage for that united front of, we've hashed this out, we've figured this out, we're coming to you together, which I think would be beneficial. And the kids are always going to want to take sides. So if you were to report to them the nitty-gritty details, you're almost giving them the fuel.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Side. Yeah.
Awesome. And the next piece is, again, if you're still figuring things out, let them know. Like we're not quite sure. Create this space for them to have voice, especially, if they're a little bit older. And, for example, there could be lots of things that they don't have control over, but maybe it's like, hey, like maybe you're working through financial budgets, right? And it's like, well, we can't have you do both, like this sport and this extracurricular activity and this other thing, but which do you think is most important for you right now, perhaps, right? Or, and maybe we can circle back, or maybe we can alternate and you can do like this one this season and then something else the next season.
Because one thing they're going to experience is a loss of control, a feeling of a loss of control. So you're suggesting like in an instance where they can feel like they have some,
Yes.
give that back to them.
Absolutely. And also check in, like learn what's important to them. Don't make assumptions. Like really give them a chance to, and maybe they're an indecisive child. So this is a wonderful opportunity to help them build that skill, right? Like this really could be such, I look at divorce, even though it's very painful for sure for everybody, it's truly a beautiful opportunity to work through some challenges and build incredibly powerful life and resiliency skills, because inevitably there's going to be hard things that all of us face. That's just the nature of being human and being alive. So this is, if we look at it that way, then it's truly a wonderful opportunity to do some powerful team building, coming together, and also ensuring that the next foundation we build for this next stage, this next chapter, serves everybody, not just one person. And also as a parent, there's, yes, you have to take the brunt of a lot of responsibility as it is, but there's some things you don't have to. You can let your kids have a voice and honor them, because again, coming back to this concept, I know I mentioned this, kids are not possessions, and they actually develop into little beings much earlier on than we think. So they are capable of weighing in on some of these things at a much younger age.
Yeah. And while we're on the kid front, you can give your honest opinion of this, but one thing, again, we had a very friendly, non-contentious split, as well as it can go. We made it a point to still get together on the weekends. We'd basically go out for a pancake breakfast, which is what we had always done. And we kept that together so that it didn't feel such an abrupt like dropping of all the things that we did. Now, that was very uncomfortable for each of us as parents, but we were trying to put him first. Is that if you're able to do that and it's safe to do that and you can stomach it, is that something that's helpful? I mean, we did eventually have to stop, of course, when I brought someone else into the picture and just schedules got difficult and it got more awkward. But is that a good idea?
It's a wonderful idea. And to your point, building resiliency skills is not just for the kids, it's for you guys too. Like yes, it may feel uncomfortable, but there's going to be situations where you're going to have to be together. Eventually your kids are going to graduate high school or university or get married or have children. And then their children are going to have major events like birthday parties, like your
recitals.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that you're actually already doing the hard work of, yes, it's uncomfortable, but let's see how we can manage this. What do I need to do to manage my own emotions? What are the bookmarks I have to put on these times in order to make it okay for myself and for the other parties involved, as well as, to some degree, it almost requires like a little bit of like exposure therapy, right? Like, so you're exposing yourself to these uncomfortable situations, understanding that eventually you're going to find the flow and the groove of how to make it work and have it be less uncomfortable. And that's a wonderful gift to give, not only to yourself, but to your child, for sure.
Yeah. And another thing we were able to do, my son adored, well, he had mixed feelings, but they did hit it off really well at first, my son and his stepdad. But I think there was also a little bit of not resentment, or maybe just like you said, a loss of like one-on-one time with mom. Like, oh, now I've had just you for a while, and now there's this other person taking up a lot of your time and energy. So fortunately, it was a long distance relationship at first. So I still was able to carve out like, okay, now it's just us and we'll do the things that we usually do. I would assume that if you're able to manage that might offset some of the feelings we talked about before.
100%. And actually, kids often, again, even into adulthood, still need some of that one-on-one time with just mom or just dad as they go through different phases and the relationships go through different phases and different stages of development or like life events. It is really useful because, to your point, it sustains some of that normalcy of like, oh yeah, this is how it used to be. This is what feels comfortable and familiar with this, and security. And in addition, it creates a safe space to talk about things that may feel uncomfortable, not because they want to hurt somebody's feelings or even push them away necessarily, but because they're not sure. They have all these emotions or questions, and they need like a safe space to speak about it one-on-one with their parent to help them either understand or just to be aware of their concerns, to see how and what could be done about softening that if there's discomfort, for example. So yeah, that's really powerful and really valuable. And I do encourage people to do that. And even to the point where just, I think one-on-one time is magic. So not only for the parent to have one-on-one time with the child, but, we know to preserve healthy, romantic relationships, like the step parent
Yes.
and the parent need one-on-one time. And really, the step parent and the children need one-on-one time as well,
Yes.
because when they don't have that, the crutch of falling to mom or dad, right, to rely on, they're now interacting with this person. And
I'm so glad you brought that up. My son is so different when it's the three of us dynamic versus the two of them, and I'm out of it in a better way.
Yeah.
So sometimes I just have to uninsert myself and not be there.
Yeah. And again, like, it's also, again, a life scale opportunity, because say it is uncomfortable, but there's so many things kids have to do that's uncomfortable. I mean, going to school feels completely terrifying and uncomfortable. And then eventually going to college and, making big decisions about future and who to date. And there's just so many things that already feel uncomfortable. That's okay. It's okay that, your kid will be fine. And also, certainly keeping in mind, how well do you know this person and all of that, and making sure that it's, safe, that there's maybe some measures, like maybe it's in a public place. Also, maybe it's an errand, maybe they both have the same hobby. And so, or just at least have the same interest, and they can, go to a sports game together, something. But just giving them that opportunity. And another thing is, it can be really challenging to have those one-on-one when staring at each other across the table or across the room. But if you're engaged in an activity together and it's more casual, then conversation can just naturally flow. For example, like, I don't know, playing mini golf or something silly, lighthearted, not big stakes, where you
informal,
can
not a ton of eye contact. And I'm sure like with tweens and teens, more so, with neurodivergence, absolutely. It just takes the pressure off. A walk, whatever. It's a really,
or like,
really
hey,
good
help
idea.
me put up this shelf in the garage, right? Like, it could be like also little projects around the house. It doesn't even have to be that the other parent is just completely not around, but it's just more about, like, we're doing this little activity together and it's our thing. And there's so many beautiful things around that. Like, it creates, again, just an opportunity to work through something together and create something together and go through an experience together, which, building that common ground of experience, that's really where the crux of how connection and relationships form, because now you have a common lens and common reference for certain things to look back on together.
I love it. So you mentioned your kids will be okay, which made me want to ask you, do you have an opinion, personal, professional? Are we automatically considering therapy for our kids when we know that we're about to or be separated, divorced in the midst of? Are we waiting to see how they handle it? I mean, it's a tall order for a child to process all this.
Sure. I think
and honestly, with parents who are involved, right? So what do we do about that?
Yes, I definitely think that considering some guidance is certainly useful. I do think that sometimes as parents, we're a little bit too tempted to give away our power, like signing the child up for therapy. That may be necessary. However, I would caution and say maybe family therapy would be better. Maybe hiring a parent coach would be better, or another professional to help with.
So it's a little more holistic of everyone involved versus just sending the child to get
exactly
help.
Because a lot of times it really comes down to, they want the support from you, right? Like, yes, they could maybe trust another stranger, though they also may not, and they could just tell them stories, and like that becomes a thing unto itself. But it's really about, right, how can you guys in your family and as parents support the children through this? And so how can you talk about things together if that's a challenge, or how can you learn to? And how, as parents, can you spot the signs of what your child may be communicating, even though not with words? And how can you then respond? Because a lot of kids' behavior has much to do with what is or is not happening from the parents oftentimes. And they could be just little tweaks. It just has to do with, right, like, everybody's reading it in a different way, and kids just have skill deficits. That's just plain and simple. So it can be much more effective sometimes to get some support and guidance for the parents and or for the family as a whole. And certainly, yes, sometimes kids need their own therapist. And I think that if you have those professionals, they will usually make mention of that as well. So when that time plus one-on-one therapy can be really challenging to find these days.
Yes.
So it's another.
Absolutely.
It's another.
All right. So anything else we should be doing to best support our kids, or do you want to move on to like, what about us, the parents involved?
Yeah, I think just a couple more things. So when the parent is ready to date, I always advise, talk about it, let your child know and see how that goes. And, really using all of your senses to tune into what that child might be saying. For example, oftentimes we don't say what we mean, even as adults. And so, what is their body language telling you? What is their facial expression telling you? What's the energy in the room? And what are the little nuanced things that you've learned to recognize, like, oh, they're just uncomfortable, or, oh, they're just avoiding the subject, right? Or they're not completely being truthful right now because maybe it's hard because kids want to, they don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't want to upset you. They don't want to hinder you, especially being kids. They know exactly how that feels because most of the time you're enforcing rules on them that they're not thrilled about. So they're extra sensitive to not do that to you. And they feel the need to protect you. So really just taking some space and so usually coming back to that conversation a few times. And, if they're very clearly letting you know they're not comfortable, then they're not ready to meet that person. So that would be a situation where I would suggest, you go ahead and date on your own time, but don't necessarily, bring that person into the home and schedule like family dinners together and stuff like that. But helping your child to identify, where those feelings coming from and helping them to move towards being ready, right? And walking them through that process is for sure, necessary. Like that's part of them adjusting and accepting and adapting to the future and life that is.
And for me, this may not be for everyone. I wanted to make sure the relationship was heading in the direction of being fairly permanent.
Yes.
But like, what was the point of introducing my 3-year-old and letting him get attached to someone that, a week later, I'm like, this is going to be too much transition until I'm sure he's not even going to know this is going on. And I'm sure, again, it depends on the age of your child and how much they can pick up on. But that was pretty important to me since I already kind of turned his world upside down to make sure I didn't introduce, unintroduce, reintroduce along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. We did the same thing. My husband, basically, me meeting her was going to make or break us. Like we already knew that we were serious, but it all hinged and dependent on whether or not she and I were going to get along. And he had prepped her and talked to her ahead of time and said, like, look, you already know that your mom and I are not getting back together. But these are all right, like conversations, and it's an opportunity because you're naming the thing that kids are wondering about and are feeling, and they often might not even realize they're feeling it or wondering about it until you have the conversation. So I know sometimes, like in my family, there's horrible things that happen and nobody ever talked about them. And they're like, yeah, if we don't talk about them, they don't exist. No, they very much exist. It just becomes an extra burdensome thing that now on top of the difficult thing, we're not even talking about it. We're not processing it. So so that's a myth, right? Like your kids are already picking up on all of it. They're already questioning it all. So don't worry about that part and go ahead and bring up the difficult topics. It gives you an opportunity to learn how to talk about it, how to think about it, and gives permission to explore it together.
Right. Awesome. All right. Are those all your kid things?
Just a final thing. So when you do finally get around to, like, say your child is like, yep, that's cool, I want to meet this person, or I'm ready to meet this person, I suggest doing it in a public place where you can kind of bump into them and gauge whether or not it's okay to actually like have a meal or do a thing or what have you and spend some time, because
Interesting.
your child very well might not Like they might think they're going to be okay. And then they get there and they're like totally not okay.
Too
Want to
much
get out.
pressure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Too much
That's
pressure, too many
interesting.
emotions, too much just, right? Like anger, fear, resentment, who knows? It could be so many different things. So it's great to have an easy out that everybody is already kind of prepped for.
That's a great idea. Excellent tip. All right. And then while we're doing all of that,
yes. Sorry.
easier said than done.
Right.
What should we remember to do for ourselves?
Yes. So I think the crux of all of it, and it was like the hardest thing for me to completely embrace, is self-regulation, and self-care is a huge part of that. So very often in times of stress or, times of overwhelm, we get dysregulated. And when that happens, our logical mind, the one that is responsible for like executive functioning, planning things, cause and effect, critical thinking, like all the wonderful, complex abilities that we have, it literally goes offline and we're purely in our emotions, which is why people will do seemingly silly things or like what we might describe as like crazy, crazy things. It's not that they mean to. It's like they're completely in their emotional mind. They're just in like survival. They're not really present at all. They're just reacting. And that's when a lot of damage can be done, as we can imagine, right? Like a lot of things can be done that we regret. A lot of things can be said that we regret, because we aren't aware of the consequences of our behavior at that moment. It's just too late. So, and earlier on, I mentioned some of the stressors of what it's like to be, a parent or a step parent in this kind of a scenario. And then that's just that piece of the equation, never mind everything else going on in our lives that we're juggling and navigating. And so the key, I think, is really self-care, which is to create intentional pockets of time regularly and hopefully start off your day doing something for yourself, to have space for all that worry and fear and whatever, and to literally ground it and bring it to zero as much as possible. And the beautiful thing is the more you create that routine, that space, that habit, the more effective it becomes, because you get better and better at it, because it becomes easier, it becomes more automatic, more
like exercising a muscle.
Exactly. And you gain deeper awareness too. So the things that before you weren't even able to recognize, you start to have these ahas that come to you like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that was a thing. I didn't realize that's where that's coming from. So, and you're better able to respond.
Yeah, I love that. And I know a lot of people sort of cringe when they hear self-care tossed around as a term, because as a person myself, like I don't enjoy getting my nails done or getting my hair done, or that just doesn't do it for me.
Right.
But I don't know how you would define it. I usually say anything that makes you feel, more full than you were before. It just makes you feel refreshed. And that could be sitting in silence or walking around the block.
Yeah. And it could also be things that truly feel more unconventional at first. Like somebody else might cringe at the idea of going for a run or exercising or doing yoga. And yet, once you try it, you realize, wow, I didn't even realize all of the goodness, because we keep so much of our trauma and emotions in our bodies. And we won't know until we start to move in those ways that it's needed. And it actually creates a really wonderful, like, release, grounding, allowing room to expend that energy, that negative energy, that maybe stuck energy, maybe toxic energy, what have you. And so it creates a lot more clarity and just calm for ourselves. And the beautiful thing is when we are calm, whoever we're dealing with and talking to, they sense that. So that helps to calm their central nervous system. It also helps them to recognize, oh, there's no threat here. Oh, like this feels nice. It just creates all interactions. It allows all the interactions to be more easy, more successful, and more effective.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Anything else on that question of what we as the parents should be doing for ourselves?
Yeah, to your point, like it could be, for somebody, it could be just literally taking in a beautiful view, right? Like just driving by a neighborhood that they really enjoy, or going to look at the water by a lake or a beach, or just sitting in nature.
It's just time it's not for anyone else. It's not about anyone else.
Exactly.
No one's pulling at you. I like to be unreachable. No one knows. No one knows how to get me.
I love that. Yeah. It could be a hobby, and it could just be, to your point, maybe you take a vacation or like a little mini weekend away just for you by yourself in some secluded area. And you're just, I don't know, you just want to sit in a hotel room by yourself, maybe that's your thing. And you plan for that every quarter, or every month, whatever your situation allows you to be able to do. The first thing is to identify those things and then be able to build in these pockets, and they can be larger or smaller. And, but the key is to really just intentionally create them and create room for them and allow yourself to do that. And so tapping into your support system in order to allow yourself that space to make that happen is also really key.
And I would say, just having gone through this, just give yourself grace, because like we said at the outset, there is no manual for this. It's different every single time. People have to go through it. Of course, most of us are doing just the best we can.
For sure.
The knowledge we have, the resources we have. And I mean, in terms of like energy and emotion and all of that, not necessarily money. And when, if you're hearing this and like, oh, I did it all wrong. When you know better, you can do better. And there's always opportunity for repair and revisiting some of these things. So this is not intended to, to make anyone feel bad. Of course, there's things I wish I had done. There's things I still wish I was doing differently, but we're just figuring it all out as we go.
Yeah. We're all on our own journey, on our own perfect timing. And it's not about beating ourselves up, right? Like it's really about understanding, to your point, you are only ever you only know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So you can't possibly have done it differently, because you're you. And that's what, from all of the life you've lived, all of the experiences you've had, that's what made sense. And that's okay. And to your point, it's never too late to just talk to your child. For example, if, you're feeling like, oh, wow, like our relationship is really suffering or what have you, it's never too late to name it and say, I would really like this to be better. Here's some thoughts I have. What are your thoughts?
And just the power of an apology, like not that you have anything to apologize for necessarily, but again, we're just looking at like, what effect is it going to have on how they perceive things in our relationships. Kids of any age, I mean, humans really love to hear, you know what, I don't love how I did that, and I want to redo.
Yes. Redos. I love redos so much.
Like let's start over. Not acting like it never happened, just saying like I know differently now, I know more, and I want to try again.
Exactly.
And I think you spoke to something earlier I wanted to revisit. Keep in mind, if you're in the thrust of this, the part that feels really, really hard, there can be beautiful repercussions that come out of, it feels like your life is upside down and things are getting ripped open and it'll never be the same. And that's true, but we know two things can be true. So, and, they're going to have 3 or more awesome parents and adults and role models in their lives and be exposed to like, I don't cook. Now my son is exposed to like chef quality cooking, and he's like a little foodie. He never would have had that exposure if we did not have this person in our life. So there are cool things and there are fun things and there are positive things. You do have to kind of get through, the hardest part is through. You have to get to that, but it can, good things can fall apart. This was sort of my motto, so that better things can come together or different things can come together. And I think that's really hard to see till you get to that part of it. So we can share that being on the other side.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And kids will surprise you, to your point. They will really surprise you as to how well they take things, because and a lot of it really has to do also with mindset, right? Like if you only focus on the things that are going wrong, well, everything is going to be like that and everything's going to be more challenging. If you focus instead on what's going right and how to build on that and how to help it be, even better or easier perhaps, then that's exactly the outcome that you're going to have. And that's what you're passing down to your kids. They're watching your every move. Every single way that you're responding to yourself, to the situation, is exactly what you're teaching them as far as how to treat themselves, how to respond to challenges, and more importantly, how to then be a parent in the future to their own kids.
Right. I love that. And that's a great segue to my next question. So in my life, I've experienced as a child a very contentious, traumatic, toxic, all the words, take them all, put them out there, divorce, custody process. It spanned many, many years. I bounced around. As an adult, like you mentioned, I brought that with me. And while it was a negative for me, I think it ended up being a positive when I decided to divorce, my partner, because first thing I said was like, and we have to keep this not like that.
Yeah.
This has to be as functional and healthy as possible. Like, it's not ideal, but we're going to make it as close to ideal as we possibly can. And we're going to be adults and we're going to put him first. Now, that is not easy to achieve and maintain. Certainly, I want to acknowledge there are instances where that isn't possible. You mentioned, abuse and neglect. There are times when we have to bring the legal system into it, and we need it to not be so friendly. But let's put those maybe more extreme scenarios aside, if parents have the opportunity to keep it friendly, can you explain how to attempt that?
Yes. I think the key is to start to think of yourselves, because there are real emotions. Of course, there's mourning, right? There's all kinds of feelings that come with those scenarios. But the key is to try to start to think about the relationship as a business partnership in the business of parenting, right? You have these children, you're never going to be able to get divorced from them. So those responsibilities don't go away, and you have to do it together because you're both the parents. So how can you shift away from thinking of yourself as romantic partners or spouses, and thinking now about yourselves as business partners? And the business has to do with ensuring the child's well-being to the extent possible. So where can you create consistency for them? Where can you, what values are you going to adopt? What is going to be the through line, right? And there can only usually be a couple, because now there's two separate households. And like you said, there may or may not be other people coming into the mix as well. So how can you determine at least a few things that can be consistent? I think that really helps for the kids and for the adults too. And also having family meetings, whether via Zoom, whether in person, but at least maybe quarterly, or something of that nature, just to decide, for example, maybe what sports or what holidays or what have you, right? What is going to be the handoff, or how are certain things going to be handled. And in the beginning, when that's challenging, finding another way to do it, right? Because I know a lot of parents who are divorced, they report that it's unbearable to speak or see their ex spouse. So can you write an email? Can you have a document perhaps that you guys are sharing back and forth, right? And can you come up with rules of when it's okay to call versus when just an email is sufficient? Can you somehow create some space and some boundaries for yourself that feel okay, so that you can be productive and effective in those conversations and in those responsibilities, and at the same time safeguard yourself, so that you're not just surprised out of the blue with this text from this person, and it throws you into a tizzy or into this emotional havoc. Yeah,
I love that analogy of a business partnership, because there's a lot at stake, right? You're almost like stakeholders. And you have to have the hard conversations. You can't let things go that need to be addressed for the sake of the business. So, maybe it sounds a little cold to think of your kid as a business, but sort of looking at it through that lens, I think could be really helpful. Going back to one element of your family's experience that had to do with trauma and healing and trusting your intuition, whatever you're comfortable sharing, what can you share along those lines that might be helpful for others to hear, if that is part of their journey or their child's journey as well?
Yeah. One thing is being really truthful. So I think the reason my stepdaughter and I got along early on is I didn't pretend with her. And so again, like being mindful of boundaries. Of course, she was young. She was turning 7 when I came into her life. And, but I think that honesty was always appreciated, like I respected her as a person, and I didn't belittle that, like, oh, she won't understand, or I just need to, pretend to be this or pretend to be that. Like if, I was, not to say that I think I was completely blunt about like, oh, I'm terrified about being a parent or having this responsibility. But I think,
how am I doing?
right. But to a degree, like I would ask and I would inquire with her, and I was transparent about that and what felt hard and, what was hurtful, and then inviting her to share what was hurtful for her. Like, I think that, that was a big deal. And then also taking an interest in things that she was interested in, and also like not being afraid to be myself. Like I have my quirk, like there's certain things I do really well. Like, for example, I'm good with like planning and organizing and like remembering details about like, oh, you had like this test and whatever. Right. But there's other things I'm really not great at, like keeping track of which anime and what the characters are, but I took an interest, but also like she knew, okay, that's not the person.
It's not your jam.
Yeah. And we would talk, and then I'd ask a lot of questions.
I think that holds more weight though. Like you aren't into this. This isn't easy for you to take an interest in, and you're doing it anyway, which is like, how special must you feel?
Thank you. Yeah. I really like video games. Like her dad is the video game buff. I don't know. Yeah. I'll watch. I kind of understand theory-ish. Like I have my own, ideas, but I'm not the person to play with. And I got like I scream a lot, and I like don't know how to do much. Like I'm terrible at it. I just had to be honest about that. Yeah. And, but to your point, I think it provides a rich experience, because when you can be honest about that, you can share like, oh, like this is why I'm so passionate about this, or, hey, help me understand, like, what is it that you really love about this, and it gives you more opportunity to truly get to know each other and get to know like your values or and a lot of times it usually has to do with like other experiences we have had or haven't had. So I think it just allows for that very rich tapestry when we bring our whole selves in. And the other piece was trusting intuition was something I learned like through my own healing journey. When I knew I had to get out of my toxic relationship with my ex, it was this physical pit that was growing in this pit of my stomach, and it was completely toxic. And I don't know exactly how to describe it or completely what it was, but I sometimes refer to it as like it seemed like a cancer was growing in me. And thank God I've never had that experience. But
you love analogies as much as I do.
Yeah. And I was so thankful that I listened, but it got to the point where I couldn't ignore it. And interestingly enough, before my stepdaughter revealed what was happening, I started to get the same kind of feeling, which is so interesting. And,
particularly as not the biological parent, that's really, really strong intuition.
Yeah. And I think it was only possible when I started to listen to my own and even recognizing that I had been severed from mine because of how I was parented, again, unintentionally, but just we all have these experiences. And I think it's so key, even though not easy and not at all fun sometimes, to look back and really reflect on the takeaways. Like, what are the main lessons? What are the main themes? And recognize like, those are true gifts, and they're gifts that only you will have, because nobody else has been through that specific journey, right? Nobody else gets to have that exact takeaway. They may have a similar one, but the way they came around to it is different. So I think, the more it's truly, every one of these is an opportunity to get to know yourself and tap into your power in these really beautiful ways. And so that's what's offered and on the table. So like, how can you excavate that?
Yeah, that's excellent. All right. We could do this all day long.
Yeah.
We'll definitely have you back, because I have a million more things I want to ask. I love this episode. I'm going to go listen to it myself for myself. For this really last question. Yeah, thank you. Take your coach hat off, your professional hat off, just be a stepmom. What is one thing that you've learned on your parenting journey hopefully something we haven't touched on yet, maybe just something you want to reemphasize that you wish you had come to sooner and you want to share with others now.
Yeah. I realized that because of, I think, how I was parented, especially when we found out all these really scary things, that our stepdaughter revealed, I realized I felt this like tremendous sense of responsibility, and it was guided by fear. And I didn't realize that, because one of the things I think I tend to have a level head when it comes to like chaotic, terrifying events, and I jump into action, but I'm also like very resourceful and I'm very strategic about it. And so I think it was easy for me to overlook. Like I just thought, oh, that's not fear, right? But no, it's still fear. It just has a different way that it, presented itself. And so I learned that I didn't need to, first of all, to recognize it and kind of allow myself to process it and allow myself to have some compassion for myself for that. But more importantly, that I didn't need to do so much. I didn't need to push all the time. Like this is where kids can really surprise you, like in ridiculously amazing ways. Like my stepdaughter, when I pulled back, and it took a little while, like, right? Like, of course, there's like behaviors and all these other things, but we just had to kind of allow that natural space for some of that to, get out of her system. But, when you have instilled and done the work to have the conversations and, create the self-care rituals and gotten the resources and extensively like talked about all of it, or create on a regular basis space for those things, you can trust it's in there. And they may not be using it, because that's part of kids becoming autonomous, right? As they like push away all the good things that they've learned, because they have to test it out and make sure that it's legit. Like they have to, be convinced, basically.
Right.
But then they will, it does stay with them, and they will come back around to it, and they will use it as needed, and yeah. And I think one final thought is, again, to not assume that kids pulling away has to be the norm. I think it's, like what space are you creating that allows you to honor them as the human being and little adults that they're on their way to becoming? And how are you like enjoying your relationship, right? I think sometimes, for sure, I got lost in like the discipline and the must and need and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, no, just have fun. Like, where's the joy? Where's the fun? Where's the silliness?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Brilliant. All right. I regretfully will wrap us up.
Okay.
Maria, thank you so much for joining me. I will be back soon with more stuff that I wish I knew sooner. In the meantime, parents, caregivers, step parents, I will leave you with my list of stuff I've learned the hardest way. Number 1, accept help when it is offered. 2, ask for it when it isn't. 3, you are the expert on your child, so trust your gut. That's that intuition that, Maria, you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And if you need to be, number 4 is be the squeaky wheel. We'll catch everybody back soon. Thank you.
Thank you.